the American people saw somebody who didn't exactly look capable of stepping in to be president should something happen to Kamala Harris. So I don't necessarily know that Tim Walz, that assistant coach that you talked about, is necessarily in a better position today. In fact, I think probably some Democrats are questioning maybe we shouldn't have done identity politics when it came to this election.
The reason Walz was picked was they didn't think they stood a chance, and they weren't going to tarnish the opportunity of a Newsom or a Shapiro in the next round by sticking them with Kamala. They wanted to make sure that they were protecting the future, and that's why Walz was picked.
And this is what JD Vance kept zooming out on. People have 4 years of Trump, and they have 4 years of this. And that's what they have to decide on November 5th.
All right, guys, I can see the weekend. It's right there. I just want to grab it. I want to grab the weekend and go. We are in this fun part of the election season, though. We're heading into the final 30 days. I get excited. I know normally I'd want the weekend, but now I just want more time to talk about politics. Great episode on the road to 270 last night. Thank you all for tuning in. Obviously, I appreciate everyone who shared the show. We'll be back Wednesday. And we got a big announcement coming up because we're going to do, this is why I always tell you to hit that notification button. We got a big live episode that we're going to go through the map with special guests. More on that later. But just trust me, this is going to be epic. You're going to want to carve out time. Tell your family, don't bother me. This is like football. You're just going to want to sit on the couch and watch the updated Road to 270. Big announcement coming up, though. We'll tell you about that. But every Wednesday going forward, we'll have a new version. All new polls come out every day. Before I get into the panel, I want to tell you about my friends at 4 Patriots. Unfortunately, as we see the news these days, we know that people are suffering. And I hope they're getting the help that they need in that whole North Carolina, Georgia, Florida area. One of the reasons that I have a Patriot Power Generator 2000X in my house, though, is that God forbid something goes wrong. Natural disaster, weather, electrical grid hit, whatever. I know that I can power the biggest things in my house, my refrigerator, my tablet, TV stuff, medical devices, all the stuff that the kids are addicted to. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about if you have kids. I can do it all with a Patriot Power Generator, and it has a solar panel, so I don't have to worry about filling up with gas and running to the gas station and hoping that the credit card swipe is there. It's such a great thing to have in your house. These things sell out big time because they're so popular and so novel, right? You don't have to, you can bring them, they're portable. Go to 4patriots.com/Spicer to get yours, but don't wait. Do it now so that in a time of crisis, you're ready. 4patriots.com/Spicer to get your Patriot Power Generator and the free solar panel. All right. We got a lot to break down with the panel. The debate, there's actually, you're not going to believe this. The dictionary got updated. It does it every year. A couple things shocked me, and I'm going to ask the panel about it because some of the words, well, they're Gen Z words, and I don't get it because I'm not hip and cool. But there's also one interesting word that I think we all know that they've updated, and I'm going to ask the panel to weigh in on this because the dictionary's gone woke. I'm sorry, the dictionary gone woke. All right, I want to have this whole panel discussion, though, free and interrupted. And before I do that, I want to thank one more great guy who sponsors the show. Leo Grillo, if you've been watching the show for a while, you know who I'm talking about. He's the founder of Delta Rescue. It all started with one Doberman, and then Leo turned Delta Rescue into a no-kill sanctuary for life. It's amazing. I've told you this before. When I first talked to Leo, he was like, it's not a shelter, Sean, because I've adopted 3 dogs. So I was like, oh, great, I know what you're talking about. And he's like, no. Delta Rescue is a no-kill sanctuary for life, and it has grown by leaps and bounds from that first action that Leo took. I'm telling you, if you go to deltarescue.org, check out the videos, see how this thing has just manifested itself over the last several years. It's cats, dogs, horses, birds, you name it. He takes care of everything. Abandoned, abused, neglected animals, gives them the veterinary care, the nutritional care that they need. But the cool thing about Leo is not just what he's done, but how he did it. He doesn't use government support. He does it through the support of people like me and you. Go to deltarescue.org, make a contribution, think about making it a recurring one. But more importantly, at the top, somewhere up there, you see that estate planning kit. If you can help Leo make this an enduring mission, one that lasts for decades and generations, that would be greatly appreciated. Think about it, pray about it. If this is something, if you're an animal lover, you're a rescue of dogs or cats, horses, whatever, Leo would greatly appreciate it. Just go to the thing, download it, take a look at it. when you look at the videos. And if you're an animal lover, I think you'll fall in love with the work that he's doing. And just think about whether or not you can include Delta Rescue in your legacy and in your estate. So thank you for your consideration. Please just go there, deltarescue.org, and take a look at that kit. All right, without further ado, I want to bring in our esteemed panel. Grace Curley up there, our big Boston correspondent. She is the host of the Grace Curley Show. Seth Denson, he goes all the way down south. He takes care of us in Texas. He covers everything for us down there. And Rob Bluey, I mean, the executive director of the Daily Signal. This is they were the leaders in independent media, and the Daily Signal has grown by leaps and bounds because of the work that they do. And I was so excited to work with their correspondents when I'm in the White House, and under Rob's leadership, the place has just exploded. It's huge. It's massive. I can't even get over it. So let's bring them all in, guys. Good to see you all. I want to just lead right off the bat. Just get the debate to me was so cool on so many levels. I thought JD Vance gave a masterclass on how to handle issues, on how to handle an opponent. It's amazing to me watching the media reaction to it. It's like, what VP debate? I don't even know what you're talking about. Who's this JD Vance guy? And I think they're pissed because they told us this narrative forever, Seth. JD Vance is a horrible person. He wants to take away all of the things you cherish in life. He hates your family. And people got to see him and were like, wow, I like him. He's authentic. He's empathetic. He's smart. This isn't the guy that we knew. And conversely, assistant coach Walz is not the guy that we had heard about. He seems like kind of a bumbling buffoon. I think the debate exposed another false media narrative.
Well, it did, Sean. And it's interesting because the Harris-Walz campaign was out a few days ahead, almost trying to set the bar as low as humanly possible for the governor. Knowing that he wouldn't do well. But I will say this, I was visiting with my folks last night who are big fans of your show. We watch all the time, and of course. And they said that they weren't able to watch the debate. They were listening to it on the radio. And they hearkened it back to kind of Kennedy versus Nixon. And they said, over the radio, Walz didn't sound terrible. Of course, he had his gaffes. He had his moments of, I can't explain where I was in 1989 type deal. But they said that over the radio, they both sounded very articulate and capable. But going back to your original point, there's zero question that JD Vance elevated himself not only as the right person at the right time for America to be sitting in that second seat, but also the future of our party. I could not be more excited with people like JD Vance out there.
Grace, how do you think he came across to women? Because a lot of women said to me after he's picked, I don't know that I like this guy. I've heard a lot of bad things. And I had more women text me in the 24 hours after the debate and say, you were right. He's a great guy. And I mean, again, I'll admit that my bubble and my universe is rather limited in terms of the people, but it was amazing how many people said, I really like this guy.
Yeah, I got a lot of that too. I was surprised because I was very excited when Trump picked him. And then I was inundated with people, especially women, saying, why didn't he pick a woman? Or why didn't he pick someone who would check some boxes? It's one of those funny things where you don't think of Republicans as identity politics, but we get into that same game too of like, who's going to appeal to the most people and bring in the tent. And I always would tell people, JD Vance is really smart. And there's a lot of people who think they're really smart.
That's right. Yeah. Wait, are you talking about me?
No, I'm totally kidding. Like, I look at someone like JD Vance and I go, oh, that's someone who's actually smart. And one of the things I'll say before I get into the woman part of it is he made it look really easy, and it's not. Like anyone out there who's looking at that and going, well, he should have hit this or he should have hit that. Like, just take a minute and realize what he just accomplished. If any of us think we could do a quarter of that, we're probably kidding ourselves. But as far as appealing to women, I think what he did, which was so smart and was probably also a lot harder to do, was he restrained himself from the urge of running up the score. He could have been brutal. He could have really laid into Tim Walz. And instead, he opted to have not just the substance was on his side. He opted to have the style too. And to say, I'm going to keep it civil. I'm going to keep it classy. And that is what drives him crazy, because he could have the substance, Sean. And if he didn't have the style, they would have spent the entire day yesterday talking about how he was abrasive. He fit the caricature of a MAGA extremist. And instead, he was kind, and he was he was softer on those things. And that was something that, again, looks easy, extremely hard to do in the moment.
Yeah, Rob Bluey, the funny thing is there's an Axios story out there this morning saying that it was intentional. They literally thought on the JD Vance team, they're like, okay, they war game this. And it was, hey, they think that we're going to come in and go for the kill. We're going to go for the jugular. We're going to be mean and like hardcore, right? Like Grace said, like that's what everybody was expecting. And they intentionally, the old saying, kill them with kindness. They came in and they're like, hi, Timmy. Good to meet you, and shake his hand. And they thought that would rattle him. And I think it did. I think his prep, Tim Walz's prep was he's going to come in. It's going to be like a prize fight. He's going to come in. He's going to give you a right hook and then a left hook and then a gut. And it was like, hi, Timmy. I like you. You're a nice guy, but we differ on these issues. And I think it threw Walz off of, like, the prep wasn't what he expected.
Sean, one of the things that I found most remarkable is that throughout the evening, you had Tim Walz actually agreeing with JD Vance on a number of policy issues. I mean, it seemed that he was exactly as you described, confused as to what he was supposed to do in a setting where JD Vance came off as a much more likable person. And so I think JD Vance did, as you said, execute a masterclass when it came to this, particularly picking up on your comments on last night's show. On the question about abortion, he was able to put Tim Walz on the defensive by going on offense and pointing out the extreme nature of what Tim Walz signed in Minnesota. I thought that was outstanding on JD Vance's part. One other thing I'll say about JD Vance, there were a number of occasions throughout the evening where the CBS News moderators attempted to fact check him, or they would bizarrely say your time is up when he had stopped speaking. I thought it was great on the part of JD Vance, and I wish Donald Trump had done this with the ABC News moderators, where he stepped in and he corrected them, and he started to push back on some of that thing. You'll remember, Sean, Newt Gingrich did that famously in one of those debates, I think back in the 2012 cycle. The American people love that. They hate the media. They want somebody to take the fight to them, and so JD Vance on a full-scale spectrum just did an outstanding job.
And he did it so politely. Like, he was like, Margaret, let me just say that it was like, it wasn't mean. It wasn't aggressive. It was, hey, I'm going to make a point here because you cut me off. I think it came across well. And that was the thing. I mean, that goes back to Grace's point about style. He really came across as likable, as kind, as empathetic, right? He kept talking about his mom and working. I'm so glad of this, but I want to combine something that Seth talked about with what Grace talked about, because it's interesting. Seth mentioned that his parents listened on the radio and hearkened back to that Nixon-Kennedy debate. And I think style matters. If you're watching it on TV or online, right, how those images matter. And there are a couple times when, even after the fact, I watched how JD reached out to shake his hand, right? And he was shaking his hand with one hand and his left hand was on his shoulder. It really showed him as like being in command. And those are images that I don't think people think about them often, but imagery matters. I mean, that was to Seth's point. If you listened on radio, you might think of it differently. But this is what I thought was fascinating, Grace, because I'll go to you first. Politico had a story. I'm using that word in air quotes because, again, they were like, God, how do we figure out something negative to say about this now that JD Vance has done so well? And they have this story out there where they show that JD's beard, Seth and I, we got a problem here, showed our toxic masculinity. It was probably offensive to women. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And then, by the way, this is from them. It says that although Tim Walz's bulging eyes, which I thought he looked like he was scared or he'd stuck his finger in the eye to the socket, I wasn't sure which one, when he kept doing the bug eye thing, they're saying it showed his passion for issues. And I was like, oh my God. So, Grace, just bluntly, did the JD Vance's beard scare you? Did it exude toxic masculinity?
No, it didn't for me. I will say, full disclosure, I don't notice beards that much just as a person. Like, I'll have coworkers who will say to me, like, what do you think? And I'm like, what about what? So I'm not probably the best audience for that. But one thing I will say, Sean, about what you were saying about the optics, and I think you're so right about that, the television, the medium of television is very different. And it's what Seth said is true. One is, I think that Walz, similar to Biden in that debate with Donald Trump, he got better as the night went on, but most people watching on TV had had enough by 30 minutes, and that was really his worst part. And the second thing is, when it was a split screen, I noticed that oftentimes when Walz was answering a question, JD Vance would sometimes look at him, but mostly was like focusing on the camera or on his paper. When JD Vance was talking, Walz was in a full turn and kind of nodding along like a bird feeder type thing. And it created this dynamic of like a teacher and a student, or someone who was just like trying to figure out what he was going to say and was really entranced by JD Vance. And I was thinking of, wow, the visual here is really benefiting Vance. I didn't think of the beard, but maybe that's a me problem.
Seth, I mean, you brought this up with your parents. When you were watching it, I mean, I just thought the visuals, I actually thought JD, his demeanor, he looked more confident. He looked more relaxed. Walz looked like he was scared to be there.
Yeah, great point. And I thought the same thing. I mean, when you've got the confidence in knowing what you're talking about, and really, JD also brought a lot of good substance. The data points were right. He was talking about the issues. He was relating it back to the American people, especially around the economy and where your dollars were and what your wage growth was, what was going on in the border crisis. He was very confident in what he was saying, and that comes across as relaxed and genuine. And I think the American people that were watching saw that, and they felt it. Whereas Tim Walz looked like he was bouncing around looking for that filing cabinet in his brain of, wait a minute, I prepped on this. What was I supposed to say? I don't know. And to Grace's point, there were some if CBS, from a moderator perspective, did a terrible job, I'm sure we'll talk about that. But from a cameraman perspective in the control room, they did a great job, because there were a couple of times where you're sitting there watching Walz nod as if, yeah, I'm agreeing with everything JD's saying. And then the second component was JD would give this look to the camera like, you sure you know what you're talking about here, buddy?
People kept saying it was Jim from The Office.
Yeah.
It was great, because we were all going, I don't know that I'm buying that. And JD was letting us in to say, yeah, I'm not buying that either.
Rob, you guys really do a lot of substantive work over there at the Daily Signal in terms of policy analysis. And I think one of the things that Seth just touched on that I thought was fascinating is Tim Walz had a bad hand, right? JD kept putting him on defense with respect to Kamala's policies. She doesn't know what her policies are. How the heck does he know? And I think he didn't know how to defend her, because what is her position on anything these days? I mean, we know in a lot of cases through an unnamed anonymous staffer that she apparently is flip-flopping on a whole host of issues. If you're Tim Walz, you got to be careful how far you get out there, because it's probably not true, or she's going to flip-flop again. And I think to myself, how much did he just lack the policy substance that JD could bring to the fight, and said, God, I don't know, maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong, but I don't even know what we believe.
Sean, the remarkable thing is the types of questions that they were asked certainly favored Tim Walz. So, I mean, he should have been on offense the whole
Abortion, night. Guns, January 6th, healthcare, democracy, J6. I mean, it was like...
Yeah, climate change. You can go down the list. And yet again, as you said, JD Vance was able to take it and turn it into a very strategic offensive position and put Tim Walz on the defense. Even from the very first moment, though, remember, this debate is happening at a time when war is breaking out in the Middle East. Israel and Lebanon are fighting. It was entirely predictable that the first question of the night would be on Israel, and Tim Walz stumbled through it. Now, that could be because he recognizes Michigan is at stake, and there's a constituency in Michigan that he's trying to strike a fine line and a balance with in order to not alienate certain types of voters in that state. However, I will say that just from the very first moment, you had, I think, as Grace indicated, the American people saw somebody who didn't exactly look capable of stepping in to be president should something happen to Kamala Harris. So I don't necessarily know that Tim Walz, that assistant coach that you talked about, is necessarily in a better position today. In fact, I think probably some Democrats are questioning, maybe we shouldn't have done identity politics when it came to this election. Maybe we should have picked the person who had the smartest mind, the best policy ideas, and actually had a record that he would be able to come in and defend and run on.
There's a point, Sean, there's a point there, though, on that. So I've been talking to some of my friends on the left, and what they're telling me quietly, obviously, is that the reason Walz was picked was they didn't think they stood a chance, and they weren't going to tarnish the opportunity of a Newsom or a Shapiro in the next round by sticking them with Kamala. They wanted to make sure that they were protecting the future And that's why Walz was picked. Again, I don't know if
that's
accurate,
like it's like at the end of the game, you're putting in the players you don't mind getting hurt. You're like, hey, you can pat this guy around, hit him up, doesn't matter, he's never going anywhere. We just don't want one of the starters to get hurt. Keep Brady out of the game. Put in one of the other backups.
Yeah, but also something that you said, Sean, which is very true about him being dealt a bad hand, is that as bad as Tim Walz was, and to Rob's point, like this was on CBS, so you can only imagine how bad he'd do if he wasn't on a network that is so, thoroughly in the tank for Kamala Harris. That's a scary thought, is how much of a disaster would that have been? But Sean, something you said is something that JD Vance articulated really well on the stage when it was one of my favorite lines. I don't know, it was between that and the climate change response. It was when he looked at Tim Walz in a very sympathetic way and said, I don't envy you having to be up here playing whack-a-mole and trying to defend her record, which is terrible, and also blame everything on Trump, which people look back on fondly. He said, that's a really hard place to be in. And I thought that's a perfect way to put it, because you could have a Josh Shapiro in there. They could have picked someone who was more competent. But even then, on substance, I think JD Vance would have walked away with the night, because at a certain point, and this is what JD Vance kept zooming out on, people have 4 years of Trump and they have 4 years of this. And that's what they have to decide on November 5th. And so keeping it about that was really, really important.
Yeah, that's the thing. You hit on one of my biggest takeaways, right? The two goals were from the VP standpoint, was to put the spotlight back on the top of the ticket, and JD did that masterfully. He kept saying Kamala Harris has been in office. Her day one was 1,400 days ago. Her policies, right? Boom, boom, boom. It wasn't about Tim Walz. He could have taken the cheap shots, but no one really cares, to be honest with you. I get it. He's flawed. He's a liar, but no one's voting because of Tim Walz. And then he kept going back to the phrase record and results when it came to Donald Trump. I do want to touch base, though, on Seth mentioned the media. We can go down this rabbit hole. Here's how I want to start, though. The whole rule was we're not going to fact check you. We know that was a lie because they did fact check JD Vance, right out of the gate. But then they also had this QR code. So if you watched it on CBS, obviously we had a lot of people watch it here on the live stream with us. But then there were people who watched the CBS live stream. And they had this QR code where you could click on it and do real-time fact-checking. Well, they did, right? No shocker. And one of the things they fact-checked JD Vance on was the fact that he called Kamala Harris the border czar. Now, there is a distinction, I think, between, on the Dems, they always say, well, she wasn't the border czar, she was supposed to find the root causes, and da-da-da-da-da. Okay, whatever. But the reality is, I want to play you something, because this is interesting, because CBS was rich enough to go fact check JD Vance about using that particular phrase. Well, let's play what CBS called her.
President Biden tapped Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, to be the border czar.
Now, she wasn't the border czar. That's what Republicans labeled her.
They were very critical of Kamala Harris, especially in her role as border czar.
All right, so you can see in that clip right there, CBS correspondents, hosts, over and over again refer to her as the border czar. I mean, Rob, it's so rich. It's like, wait a second. I did what you did, and now you're fact-checking me for something that you did.
Sean, I went back and I looked at that very same article that you referenced there. And first of all, thank you for digging that up. That is fascinating to see. I went back to the original article from, I think it was March of 2021, in which Joe Biden himself described her responsibilities. And he said that she was in charge of figuring out the migration crisis that was taking place. Now, the Democrats have spun this as she was going to look at the root causes or whatever, language they're now using. But CBS was entirely wrong in that fact check. In fact, and JD Vance had it precisely right. I will say this. We have now covered for the last 3.5 years the crisis that has been emerging at the southern border. We've sent Daily Signal reporters down there to see it firsthand. And this is a problem that Kamala Harris could have addressed. She had the opportunity as the vice president, somebody who Biden put in a position to solve, and she showed no desire to do so. I think that going back to the points we've been talking about, if you're going to compare the records, look at the situation that we had at the end of the first Trump term and the success that the policies that they had implemented achieved at the border and in stemming the border crisis. And then on day one, Joe Biden comes in and wipes away all of that, and we immediately are flooded with illegal aliens.
Seth, I want to get back to the point, though, that you made, right? This is CBS. They they lied about not fact checking him, but then they fact check him on something that their correspondents said. Right? If I were JD Vance, I'd be like, wait a second, you said it. I repeated you. You called her the border czar over and over and over again on your network. I used the phrase on your network. And then you tell me I'm the guy spreading falsehoods?
Well, and the other issue here, Sean, though, I think the media knows that they're all going to carry each other's water on this. They're not going to call the other networks out on it. And that's a shame. So I've seen a lot of montages of all the networks, everyone from Jen Psaki to, Morning Joe, you name it, calling her the border czar, calling her, saying that she was in charge of the border. And I think Rob makes a great point. She loved the title, but she didn't want to do the work. And I mean, we say it in text, that's all hat, no cattle, right? I mean, you're willing to go out there and say, yeah, I've got a really big job to do. I'm just not going to actually do the job and hope it doesn't come back. By the way, the root cause, open borders. There's the root cause. I just solved that for you. This isn't a hard thing to figure out.
I love when they pivot to that, and I'm like, okay, fine. The root cause then, you guys, I mean, it's a magnet. Go down the 60 Minutes, all these other organizations, they go down to these countries where they're coming from, and their view is Joe Biden wants us to come, right? The root cause is you guys have said, I mean, look, this isn't, it's so simple. If you walk down the street, if a company, a store put in a sign that said, free food, right? People would come and they'd go, well, you told me free food. And that's what we've done is we've created a sign, a magnet, whatever you want to call it, and said, hey, the border's open. You get a cell phone, a room, all these free prizes if you come over the border. And then we go, yeah, I don't know why they're coming. I mean, this isn't tough. But the thing that's fascinating to me is that the media, literally to your point, and this is great. I get frustrated every day about this idea of like the media loves to pretend that they are living in a world of 25 years ago. They are all in on her, right? Rob brought up the topics. It was climate change. They didn't have to call her, by the way. Everyone keeps going, you can't leak the questions. They were like, don't worry about it. We're just we got you. You don't even have to worry about the questions. So when you hear the topics, just sit back. Like it was climate change, gun control, abortion for 45 minutes. They are so dishonest. And I love the fact that these guys get out there and want to talk about lying and democracy and misinformation. I mean, think about it. They're fact-checking JD Vance on something they did. How dishonest, that is misinformation.
Yeah, whatever they're accusing you of, they're guilty of tenfold. And it's the same thing whenever you hear debunking. It means it's probably going to be true in 2 years, and the New York Times will write about it. And when they say that something's fake news, again, it's probably real. But about the border specifically, and I've talked about this with you before, Sean, but I do find that this is a theme with the Biden-Harris administration. It's one of those things where two things can't be true at the same time. You can't be up there telling us what a fabulous job you've done on the border, how you've closed the border, and you have better numbers than Trump on deportation and less crossings and all these things. And then when someone calls you the border czar, you're like, I'm not the border czar. Don't put that on me. It's like, wait a second. It's the same thing with the only reason you're here. The only reason that you didn't have to win a single vote is because you're vice president. That was the whole thing, the machine that got you to this place unfairly, undemocratically, but whatever. And then now you don't want to be tethered to Joe Biden. It's like, well, which one is it? You got to pick a lane here. Was it the 4 years of this awesomeness that we all don't understand? Or are you going to fix everything and be the new change candidate? And yeah, the media, to your point about it's like they don't understand that people have the internet. Like we all have access to it. You're not the only ones. We know what you wrote. And they're not trying to walk away from things they wrote 20 years ago. They're trying to walk away from things they wrote 2 months ago. And it's like, hello, I know how to use Google. Like I'm not, the K-File investigates from CNN, but I know how to use the internet.
I love
Sean,
I love the point that you made because if you can't be proud of it and walk away from it at the same time. I'm sorry, Seth.
No, I was just saying to Grace's point and what you just made. I know we've kind of moved on a little bit from the debate, but did you catch it when Walz said the Harris administration in the debate? He actually said, I tweeted it out. I was like, he just said the Harris administration has done blah, 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 blah. And then he immediately caught it and went, Biden-Harris administration. He couldn't get away from it fast enough. It's almost like they were throwing things at him like, no, we're trying to distance ourselves from this.
Right.
And you just said it was the Harris.
Well, it's also the same guy who said that he's friends with a lot of school shooters. And I thought but here's the thing that's interesting. A couple weeks ago, JD Vance, in a conversation with Dana Bash, I think misspoke. Maybe at least that was my take when he said something to the effect of, sometimes we make up stories, because he was trying to make the point that, but then, and everyone said, see, he's a liar. Da, da, da. When Tim Walz said that he's friends with a lot of school shooters, everybody came out and said, that's not what he means. And it was like the immediate, whatever they say, we will make sure that we cover for you. That's not what you said. That's not what you meant. Here's what really happened. When someone on the right says something, it's like, see, this is who you are. This isn't a mistake. You can't, the way that we do things, and to your point, the Harris administration, it was, well, you know what he meant. You know what he meant, right? Move on. And that's the thing that constantly kills me. Rob, let me ask you this, though. There were calls online from folks on the right that said, that's it, we should be done with CBS, okay? And I've heard this before, right? It's the same people who say, I'm tired of the mainstream media, and then go hang out at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Like, either stand on principle and be a big person, or just pretend, be a hypocrite. That's fine. I don't care, but you can't have it both ways. Should Republicans, let me just kind of give you my take on this. And then I think that until we stand on principle and say, we're not going on your networks, we're not going to add credibility to you, right? Then it's all of it just a meaningless threat, because if they know that at the end of the day, we're going to go on CBS Evening News and face the nation with Margaret Brennan, who hosted that, then it doesn't mean anything until we start saying, no, I'm not going on your network, because they get away with it. They don't go on Fox. They get to push out the Daily Signal out of the briefing room and take the credential away. No one says a damn thing, but our side always goes, okay, well, it's ABC and we want to go to their party.
Well, Sean, it's absolutely correct. And I applaud Donald Trump for saying no to 60 Minutes for that precise reason. Yep. Why should he sit there and subject himself to that type of treatment when he knows exactly what's coming his way? I thought that this year we might see some change with the Commission on Presidential Debates finally exiting the stage and maybe opening up a new pathway. The problem is, as you identified it, Kamala Harris wouldn't agree to a debate on Fox News. Remember, Donald Trump proposed those 3 debates. She was the one that wouldn't agree to the terms. She wants it only in those friendly settings where she knows exactly what the topics are going to be, as you articulated. I think we need an entirely new model going forward. Obviously, you had a hand in this back when you were running the show in 2016 in terms of how Republicans handled things in the primary. I think if we could go to a model where so many of these establishment legacy organizations, which, by the way, have no trust or credibility with the American people anyways, so let's go to a system where people who, are influencers in some other realm can be asking the questions, or let's take the moderators out of it entirely so there's no
timekeeper.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's my point. Pick a venue.
Put them in front of voters and let the voters ask the question.
Right. Have a stage and say, here, you have an hour and a half, go. We don't, and by the way, it's open feed. Everybody would cover it. This is not that hard. And I think that, here's my point. After the election, I think if one party puts out a proposal and says, here's what we propose for the future, and starts laying the groundwork, that could possibly work. I want to ask you guys real quick, though, around the horn. I want everyone, what was an issue that you were disappointed didn't come up? Is there an issue that you thought, wow, I actually, or a topic that didn't come up that you thought might? Seth, was there something? I mean, you really know the economy and that. Is there somewhere in that realm, maybe something else? But I just think, is there somewhere you said, I'm surprised they didn't ask about?
They really didn't hit on tariffs and China.
Yes.
And I was waiting for that because I thought JD brought it up. But nobody ever talks about tariffs as a national security component. I mean, UBS just did a recent report that said if Trump were to reinstate the tariffs and do what he's talking about, it would shrink China's economy by 2.5 percentage points. That is massive. We didn't win the Cold War because we dropped a bomb. We won the Cold War because of economic pressures on Russia and communism. And that's effectively, I think, is not talked about enough. And I think JD Vance could have handled that. I was hoping we would hear more about China as our primary adversary, both economically and potentially geopolitically, and that just wasn't talked about.
Rob Bluey, is there anything that came to you? I agree. China to me was a big one. There's a bunch of economic issues. What else do you think got missed?
Well, China did come up, but only in the context of challenging Tim Walz's false statement that he was there for the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Look, lots of people, listen, Lots of people get confused if they weren't in Tiananmen Square in 1989. Seriously, how many times have you been walking down the street and you go, wait a second, was I just in Tiananmen Square during a massive uprising? Because I swear that's where I was. But now that you bring it up, you're right, I wasn't there. I mean, I'm just saying, let's give the guy a little slack because lots of people confuse being in Minnesota. Have you ever been in Minneapolis or the Mall of America? I can see how that's confusing.
On that point, though, Sean, I would say the thing that I was most disappointed, I was glad that they brought up at least one instance of Tim Walz lying, but there were so many other things that they could have potentially asked about. The stolen valor controversy, misstatements that he's made as the governor of Minnesota. I mean, you could have gone down the list. Yeah. And I think that would have told the American people a little bit more about him, and it would have given him an opportunity, by the way, to respond. I would imagine that was probably part of his debate prep.
Oh, it had to be. I mean, he not just has a stolen valor issue and a history of lying that didn't come up, Grace, but he lied about immigration, and they didn't fact check him on this. There's a chart that came out about crossings, right? That was true. I mean, he misstated that. He got caught lying on that. It was amazing what he got away with.
Yeah, I will say, though, that I think the Tiananmen Square question, it was kind of like, all of his lies are pretty similar in the sense that they're meant to make him look better or embellish his resume. And so that one for me, I didn't need to hear every single one because I agree with you, Sean, about what you said in the beginning, where a lot of people don't care that much and you can kind of get in the weeds. And I thought that his response to the Tiananmen Square was probably exactly what he would have responded to the stolen valor claim. It was like, I'm a knucklehead. I say things wrong. And it was so uncomfortable. I was watching in my bed and it was so uncomfortable that I took the covers and I just like pulled them up over my face because I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do like 5 more questions of this. I will say one thing I wish had been brought up and I wish the media would spend more attention on is the attempted assassinations on Donald J. Trump. I mean, we act like this was 7 years ago. This is all very recent. And I would like for Tim Walz to explain how his party continues to accuse the right of, violent political rhetoric and continues to demonize this person, but doesn't seem to slow down when it comes to their own violent political rhetoric. Like, how about you take a little bit of accountability? If it were reversed, and I'm glad it's not, and I never want anyone to be hurt, but if it were reversed, we would be answering questions about that at every single possible forum.
Yeah, I would just add, by the way, I think the China one is huge. I think the idea that there were 2 veterans and no one talked about veterans, and that there was no discussion about the military and our preparation. I mean, that could have national security. I got a couple more things I want to hit because there's some new definitions in the dictionary that I want to touch on. But there's a story that came out, Seth, yesterday in the Daily Mail about Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff. And it says, quote, he forcefully slapped ex-girlfriend for flirting with another man in booze-fueled assault. This is a guy who is, quote, redefining toxic masculinity, who is showing what it's like to be a real man. And there are serious allegations now. I mean, obviously, this is a guy who hooked up with the nanny, got her pregnant. And now we're hearing about this story as well. And yet outside of the Daily Mail, nobody's covering it. And I think, look, she's the one I have always said families are off limit. But if you bring your family into the campaign and want to make him a centerpiece by saying he's the new definition of masculinity and he's got a history of hitting women, I don't know that that's something that should get a pass. And I'm sort of amazed that outside of the Daily Mail, no one has covered this. And I'm not saying he's guilty or he's not guilty, but there's clearly people that could substantiate this or corroborate it. And I don't feel like it's not popping up anywhere. And he has a history now of lying because we saw that this issue with the nanny getting her pregnant with his first wife wasn't something they included on their vetting report, that when she was first up for vice president.
Yeah, I think if Jen Psaki, and I think Jen Psaki was the one that said that he was redefining masculinity, right? And is that redefining it as what was Ike Turner? I mean, what are we doing? But to your point, I'm not surprised that nobody's covering it, Sean. Haven't we learned they're not going to cover anything that could be potentially negative or damning to Kamala Harris or the Democrats? And so they're not going to ask a question. Imagine if this was Don Jr. I mean, it would be plastered across. We would have everybody, but we should have learned based on the Hunter Biden stuff that they're just not going to touch this.
Yeah.
They're not going to go anywhere near it.
This is a guy. All right, Grace. Every year, the dictionary Merriam-Webster comes out with new definitions. I want to get to a few of them because you may actually school me on some of them. But before that, the big one that I thought was fascinating is, no kidding, it finally caught up. We've now changed the definition of a female. So it is now saying that female is having a gender identity opposite the male, which, I mean, okay, so it's sort of like now becomes this like circle where it's like, what's a male? Well, a male is opposite a female. That's what it. So you've now created a situation where you can't define anything because it's the opposite of the other thing that we can't define. So according to the dictionary, having a gender identity, not chromosomes, not science, not the ability to have a baby, not any of the scientific definitions, but it's having a gender identity, key word there, that's opposite the male.
But then doesn't the question become, well, what's a man? And then that.
But that's right. And that's why I'm saying the new definition of a man is having a gender identity opposite a female. So it starts, it's a vicious, like, so the answer is it means nothing anymore. The word means nothing because it's the opposite of the other thing.
Yeah,
so what is black? Black is not white. What is white? Not black.
I mean, it's 1984. What's the quote? It's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words. Like, when you control the language, you control the masses. And if people don't understand, and this is really a big part of the Democrat agenda, which I'm sure Robin Seth can speak to more than I can, but it's like having the vagueness is the point. Confusing people is the point, because then you can always win these arguments when there are no definitions and nobody knows what we're really talking about. People get confused, and then you can control the conversation and you can control the argument. So I definitely think this is purposeful. It's unfortunate that it's happening. But we saw this in the Supreme Court. Ketanji Brown Jackson, she said, I'm not a biologist. So maybe the people at Merriam-Webster or whatever dictionary we're using here, they're not biologists. And so they don't feel comfortable putting out that definition. But I fear for the future. I fear for people who are actually, like, we all have knowledge from the before times where you could actually define these things. Some people, this is their life. They're going to be confused forever.
I don't know. I'm mind blown by this because they went out of their way now to create further confusion. I mean, I don't know about you guys, Seth or Rob. When I was a kid, right, I wouldn't know a word. I'd go up. My parents would say, go look it up. I'd grab the dictionary, I'd look it up. And now if I'm a kid, I'm like, wait, so what is this? Like, and I, to Grace's point, I mean, you're right. As soon as you control the words and the dialogue, you control everything.
What's the greatest line? Was that line? The greatest lie the devil ever told was convincing people he didn't exist.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of the same thing here. It's the greatest maneuver for the left and the far progressives that want to change everything about human culture and normalcy. Is to convince things that there is no normalcy. Right. And I think that's what we're seeing play out right here.
Yeah.
Sean, one of the best things that we could probably all do is go buy paper copies of dictionaries that are on the shelf now or printed 5-10 years ago, because they will be radically different for the future generation of this country. We've seen this trend already. We talked about media bias. Look at the Associated Press style book, which is essentially the Bible that all of the reporters use for the language that they put in their stories. And the AP has gone completely woke and adopted all of these left-wing ideas. So it's really sad that we're heading down this path.
I'm going to pull the dictionary, my kids are going to be like, all right, kids, this is a dictionary. This is when a woman was actually defined by her chromosomes. Ha, ha, ha. And they're going to be like, Dad, go sit down. But
they're going to say, be quiet, Grandpa.
Yeah, be quiet, Grandpa. You and those words. All right, it's Thursday. We wrap up with our winners and losers. Grace, who do you have as your winner and loser?
Okay, so my winner, it would be easy for me, especially because you chose me first, to say JD Vance, and I think that he is a winner. But I'm actually going to say Donald Trump Jr., who we brought up today.
Oh!
Donald Trump Jr. was getting plenty of press when Donald Trump picked JD Vance.
Yeah.
People were saying he must be really mad at DJT Jr. because he was a big Vance guy, and people are wondering why Trump listened to his son because this was a horrible pick. And he was he was able to take such a victory lap, so much vindication.
I know. You're right, though.
He's loving it.
All right,
so
who's your loser?
My loser is Doug Emhoff or Jen Psaki, because like Seth said, I mean, the timing of that interview of, fawning over him as this pinnacle of masculinity, only for days later for these tabloid stories to come out. He's a big time loser today.
Good call. Seth Denson, winner and loser.
Winner is the American people. They got to see an articulate debate that didn't go into name calling or yelling or or any of that. And they saw effectively a vice presidential candidate put the moderators in their place when he knew they needed to. And so I'll go and give you my loser, which were those moderators. CBS News had an opportunity to say, we are not what they say we are in the mainstream media. They failed.
Excellent. All right, Rob Louie.
Okay, my winner is Scott Pressler, who's doing some great work in Pennsylvania. Sean, I was up there in Bucks County a few weeks ago seeing the ground game. They have flipped the voter registration from a Democrat to Republican in, I think, well over 60.
We're going over those numbers tomorrow. We're going to talk to Michael Whatley tomorrow. I'm so glad you brought up Scott. That's awesome. Yeah. Yep, you're absolutely right.
Pennsylvania's the critical state. Loser, I'm going to pick Taylor Lorenz. She no longer has the Washington Post as her platform.
Oh, so good.
Best wishes to her.
Yeah, she departed, which means she got fired because she lied. By the way, she called Joe Biden a warmonger and then lied about it, got caught lying about it. So they've decided to part ways. All right, my winner, I went easy on this. It's JD Vance, and my loser is Merriam-Webster. I mean, the idea that we're doing this, I think, is a huge, huge loss for society. Anyway, I always love the panel discussions. Thank you guys for being here. As I mentioned, Michael Whatley, the RNC chairman, is here tomorrow. We got a big announcement that we'll make on the show as well about the road to 270 and some live episodes that we're doing. So you're not going to want to miss that because I'm going to ask him about voter registration. I'm going to ask him about the ground game. You're not going to want to miss that episode. That's why you hit the notification button and the subscribe button on all platforms. Thanks for being here. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.